Well, it is my pleasure now to introduce today's guest speaker. One of my absolute favorites. Fun and funny and witty and handsome as hell. You know it's me, right? Okay, so let's get started. Thank me for that fabulous introduction. And thank you for allowing me just to be a little bit silly up here and have a good time doing this. I'd like to thank everybody that participates in this service today. And Delaney, I would like to thank you personally for that incredible job of Anna Nalik's song, Breathe. What do you guys think of that song? Do you know it? Most of you know it. It is a song that I have loved for a long time. It is, however, or at least it strikes me as perhaps not the most uplifting, inspiring lyrics on planet Earth. Does it strike you in that way? It might even be said that Anna Nalik has a very strong sense for the monotonous or the mundane. She speaks to those aspects of life, the repetition, the repetitive nature of much of life. In the lyrics, if you know them or if you caught them, you can't jump the track. We're like cars on a cable. And life's like an hourglass glued to the table. Can you feel that? Can you get that visual that, there's something going on that I want so desperately to change. I need to turn over the hourglass and start again, but it is stuck. Therefore, so am I. And so I've had that experience. I suspect most of us have, where we have something going on in our lives, a situation, even just a thought process that is repeating again and again. And I would love desperately to escape it. Yes? Yes. And so, the title of my talk today is The Great Escape. Right? That place of being on that hamster wheel and running desperately, trying to get away from myself, while all the while really wanting to be this guy. Just hanging out and chill and just happy, joy. And so, Anna Nalik's song, she goes on to say, if you were able to hear it, she says at one point in the song, "It's 2 a.m. and I'm still awake writing a song." And do you know why she says she is writing this song at 2 a.m.? She says that if I get it all down on paper, it is no longer inside of me, threatening the life it belongs to. My God, that's powerful to me. That is enormously powerful to me, and it is the reason I chose this song for this service today, is because it is a lyric with which I so readily identify. Now, she does give some good advice in her song. In fact, in the song title, she gives what I think is really good advice, where she just says, breathe. Just breathe. And this is why that lyric is so important to me. And that is that I will share with you that breathing has not always been an easy thing for me. In fact, over the course of my life, for most of my life, I had great difficulty in breathing. or more specifically, great difficulty in getting that full breath of air. You know, the one where your lungs fill to capacity? I do not know when this started for me, but I can tell you I have memory of it as early as about 4 or 5 years old, when I was a little bitty boy and I was a tiny, tiny child. Starting kindergarten and first grade, I was as much as a foot shorter than all of my classmates. My sister has 11 years older than I. She has a picture in one of her high school yearbooks where I was transported to the school play that she was in, and I'm sitting in the front row, and I'm leaning up. I'm not leaning against the back, and it's those little fold-down theater seats. And my cowboy boots just barely reached the edge of the seat. I was that tiny. And yet already I had developed this difficulty breathing where I would gasp and breathe in and felt like my lungs filled to here and they really needed to fill to here or so. And yet they would not. And I would occasionally ask one of my parents to stand behind me. And I would say, I'm going to breathe in and you push here. And I was in hopes that as they did that, it would allow my lungs to expand a little more fully and allow me to get a little deeper breath of air. And so off to the doctors we would go, and we would return every time with the same diagnosis. The doctors would tell us, there is nothing wrong with his lungs. Nothing wrong. And so it would take me decades, way into adulthood, for me to understand that my breathing issue was not a physical one. It was, in fact, all in my head. In other words, the problem was not with my lungs, the problem was with my thinking and with my thoughts. Those thoughts that said, I am little and small and insignificant and not nearly as big and strong and tough as perhaps I should be, or as the other kids in my family or in my school, etc., on that hamster wheel. And so I identify with that ananalic lyric from the standpoint that this is how it felt to me. To suffer a shortness of breath for decades over the course of a lifetime felt to me like there was something inside threatening the very life it belonged to. And so began my quest for escape. Right? To escape all those thoughts that I could not live with, and yet did not know how not to have. My God, is that a conundrum? As a young teenager, I hit what I thought was pay dirt on this grand quest. I thought I found the cure for that which ailed me. And as this young teenage boy, a little taller by then, I suppose, but as this young teenage boy, I was introduced to the medicinal qualities and the healing properties of alcohol. And I would soon discover that I could take a can or two of beer, for instance, and drink that down pretty quickly. And for a moment, maybe for the first moment in my life, I could relax for a minute. I could feel for a moment as if I fit into the skin which surrounds my body. And the hamster wheel here would subside for a brief time. Well, it made perfect sense in the mind of this 14-year-old or so boy that if I could achieve that effect with 1 or 2 cans of beer, why would I ever limit my experience to only 1 or 2? Perfect thinking, it seems. And I will assure you, I did not limit my experience. I went well beyond the recommended dosage of 1 or 2 and escalated to ever higher levels of engagement. And so by the time I was a young man, or really probably by the time I was a late teen, I had exchanged a thinking problem for a drinking problem. And it was a problem which would, in many ways, define much of my life over the next several decades. And yet, at least a couple decades later, it was becoming clearer and clearer to me that the crutch upon which I leaned so heavily came with its own set of problems. And it became more and more apparent that the very coping mechanism which I used to negotiate life without going absolutely insane was itself destroying me. And it became that which I could no longer live with. And so, on a new quest, I went on this new quest for a new life where I did not have to drink in order to cope with life. And I read some things and, okay, how am I going to do this? I investigated this a little bit, and I heard this fabulous adage, and it was before I ever set foot in a religious science center, but it is from Ernest Holmes, and it's the idea that if I am going to change my life, I must first change my thinking. Most of us here know that saying and have heard it probably numerous times, but I heard that, change your thinking, change your life, and I was convinced that that was my next step forward, and so I committed to doing exactly that. I would change my life by changing my thinking, and here I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I spent about 18 years of my adult life. And I was working at the time on the Las Vegas Strip at the Venetian Hotel. And I would work until 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. I'd work late. Luckily, the little establishments are open all night. So I would leave the Venetian, I would get in my car, and I would head westbound on Desert Inn Road, making my way home. Excited about this new way of living and of being. And yet there were a number of obstacles along that path. And those obstacles were in the form of these little establishments whose business is to install and service hangovers. You may call these bars or pubs or whatever you happen to call them. But as I passed these locations, where I was, over the years, such a frequent flyer, these old thoughts came rushing back to me, suggesting things like, everybody here, your friends are here. Why be such a snob? Stop in, say hi. Just have 1 or 2. what harm could possibly come from one or two? And in that moment, as those old thoughts came up, as that hamster wheel engaged, all the enthusiasm and momentum and encouragement I had mustered toward this new way of being evaporated in an instant. Because I knew that I had failed. I had failed, and I was a failure because I had committed to changing my life by changing my thinking, and my thinking had not changed. And so, quite honestly, I found it often much easier to do as my thinking suggested than to live through the emotional turmoil of the failure I felt. And this process and this repetition and this hamster wheel would repeat itself in my life for far longer than I care to admit in front of this crowd today. But it took a long while. And it was a level of angst and anxiety and turmoil that I can't even fully describe. But eventually, and this is after leaving Las Vegas and moving to the great state of California, and moving, in fact, to this area, one day madness struck me, and at least a different form of madness struck me one day. And this madness struck in the form of a new thought which I'd never experienced before. And I don't know why it happened. I don't know where this thought came from, why it decided to enter my mind at this time in life. Perhaps it was because I had already set foot in this building and begun my studies in religious science. Or perhaps because I had started a meditation practice. I really prefer to think of it as divine inspiration landing on my shoulder and whispering in my ear. But that whisper came in the form of a question, one of Reverend Joyce's questions. What if? And it would say to me, what if it just didn't matter to you any longer? What if you could just breathe and allow any thought that wishes to present itself for your inspection to do so without fighting, without running? What if you could make peace with those thoughts in your mind and simply walk forward, press forward, move forward in the direction of your greatest desires? What if? How might that change your experience of life? Well, folks, it strikes me as kind of curious in that when I have this conversation on a personal level, and even speaking about it today on this stage, it seems like a tiny, small, infinitesimal, almost insignificant adjustment. And perhaps it is. But the ramifications of this notion in my life are enormous, because the results in my life from practicing this are nothing short of miraculous. And so this little idea, little adjustment or huge adjustment, however you might see it, simply making peace within myself with that which is happening within me and moving forward anyway, releasing the countertop anyway, has been my great escape. And it has provided me with a fuller, more complete understanding of change your thinking, change your life. May I tell you what it does not mean. It does not mean that old thought patterns which you have developed over the course of a lifetime will vanish in an instant. But it does mean that if and when those old thought patterns come up within your mind, they will no longer carry the enormous weight which was suffocating you. They will no longer define your life and hold you in place on a hamster wheel from which you would like to step off. And so, I will tell you, my breathing is healed. My breathing is healed. I will say, I am always consciously aware when my lungs fill to capacity. I am consciously aware of it, and it to me is an absolute gift because it is an ability that I live without for so much of my life. And so when I get that delicious deep breath of air, wow, it is amazing to me every time. And may I tell you about the 3,287 other things this has done for me. Tomorrow will mark my 3,287th day of sobriety. Thank you. I do not know this number because I have wall calendars all over my house, and I've X'd this off 3,000 plus times or something like that. I know this number because I calculated it because tomorrow, March 28th, 2022, for me will be 9 years, no beers, no alcohol, no mood-altering substances, other than the occasional Snickers bar perhaps, but 9 years with a couple leap days thrown in brings me to 3,287 days. And I so appreciate you and you being here to celebrate this with me today. But the message really for me today is not my message. It is not me and something I've done. It is hopefully a little glimmer of hope to someone who needs to know that the light at the end of that tunnel is not an approaching train. It is a guide begging you, calling you to move toward it, to emerge from that darkness victorious. And so my question is this: what hamster wheel is it from which you would like to escape? I don't care what the specifics of it are, but I will tell you this. The first step off that hamster wheel is to stop running. Have you noticed you can't outrun yourself? Yeah, I think it's because every time you turn around, right there you are. And so stop running, stop fighting, throw in the towel and just stop fighting. Simply breathe and allow. Because I am standing here today as living proof that life gets better if you let it. And I am standing here today to say, as much as I love Anna Nalick and her song Breathe, Anna Nalick is wrong. You can jump the track. You are not some car on a cable relegated to some less than repetitive, monotonous, horrible existence. And so if you want or need to make a change and that hourglass seems to be stuck to the table, then turn over the whole damn table and start again. Because I promise you, there is a beautiful, wonderful, amazing life awaiting you. And it all begins with your great escape. Happy Sunday, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.